Hello, and good evening. My name is Jared Hubbard, and I am a project manager for the City of Rochester. Tonight is the final open house in this phase of planning for the Rochester Rapid Transit System. I want to thank those of you who have attended this virtual event over the past few weeks and provided feedback. We appreciate your continued commitment to the planning process since COVID-19 required us to take our engagement efforts online. As we continue to navigate the effects of this pandemic, we're reminded how fortunate we are to live in a community where medical expertise abounds, and we are able to lean on our friends at the Mayo Clinic and Olmsted Medical Center to do what they do best. Meanwhile, at the City of Rochester, our job is to help preserve our community lifelines as we navigate this crisis. But it's also to position our city for the future so that we can come out of this stronger, more resilient, and ready to embrace the new normal. Thank you for your attention and commitment to improving our community in which we live, work, and play. We look forward to your feedback tonight. As part of this virtual open house process, we have a fairly elaborate webpage. On there, you'll be able to find videos of the previous 2 webinars, PDFs of tonight's presentation, along with the slides from the previous 2 webinars as well. Access our interactive webpage where you'll be able to find additional information and resources. And visit our frequently asked questions page to get a few additional bits of information. I'll also take note to say that from the 2 previous webinars, we have and will be posting questions asked as part of the webinar, so you can see those answers as well. Through the month of April and through this process, we ask that you provide feedback in one of 3 forms. The first is through our interactive open house webpage. There you'll find information sorted by 3 geographic regions. At the conclusion of each one of those geographic areas, we have several questions. We ask that you complete those questions to complete the survey. You can also reach us through the project email, that's rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov, or by calling 507-328-2025. Tonight, we will take a few minutes to once again give you an introduction to the study and review the purpose and background. But the focus of tonight will be the Broadway corridor, specifically the 4th Street to 9th and a half Street area. Tonight, we'll review station locations and land use scenarios in that Broadway corridor. We will review 2 separate scenarios. The difference between those 2 scenarios are station locations, and we ask that you take note of those differences. We'll conclude tonight with once again reviewing the ways that you can provide additional feedback. Tonight, you'll have 2 possible ways to provide feedback to myself and the other panelists. The first, you can use the Q&A button on your toolbar. This will allow you to type your question for submission. These are the questions that will be posted online and later answered on the webpage. Additionally, you can use the raise your hand feature. By pressing this button, you'll signify to myself and the other panelists that you have a question. Throughout the presentation tonight, we'll take 3 pauses in the presentation and do a Q&A session. During that time, if you have raised your hand, we'll identify you, unmute your mic, and allow you to speak directly to myself and the other panelists on your question. All we ask is that if you wish to ask a question in this manner, that you please give us a second, to unmute your mic. If you hear your question answered in the presentation or otherwise, we ask that you press that button again to lower your hand. At the conclusion of each one of those Q&A sessions, we will then lower everyone's hand to start anew for the next section. With that, I once again thank you for your participation tonight and through this entire process. And thank you for your time and ability to be flexible through this pandemic. post-pandemic events. With that, I will hand it off to Chris Hall, our consultant with SOM. Chris?
Okay, thank you, Jarrett. I'll be joined by Adele Hall of SRF Engineering as well through this process. So we wanted to step back, and some of you will have seen this introductory section previously on the previous webinars, but we did want to step back, make sure everybody had the same information in each of the sessions before we went into the detail of proposals for each component of the study area. But as background, this is really a plan which is looking at a wider assessment of economic development, land use, public realm options and opportunities associated with the rapid transit proposal. And this is a more expansive look at what the impact and potential and opportunities are for Rochester in this corridor associated with this investment. And this investment, and we'll clarify this a few times, the rapid transit route moves along 2nd Street, beginning at the West Transit Village, which is currently the Mayo West parking lot, moves along 2nd Street through downtown and then south on Broadway, and we'll focus on Broadway today. And this really is an opportunity to add significant new mobility options for workers, residents, visitors to the city, and is a way to shape and steer growth, but also shape places and embark on a journey of placemaking. And the purpose of this study is really to advance a number of components, enabling growth, supporting economic development, but also thinking about people's well-being and their quality of life in the future, as well as thinking about the specifics of the transit system, rapid transit system, and how that may work and relate to other ways of moving around, and then encouraging a mix of uses and activities and public spaces that can really make this a dynamic and high quality corridor for the city. And there are some kind of larger goals as we go through this, linking transit and growth locations so that they work together and support each other, supporting downtown and making sure that it's dynamic in the future, ensuring that neighborhoods are livable. And one of the really important things is this is a rapid transit system that will support existing neighborhoods. And we really want to make sure that this is an enhancement to existing neighborhoods, as well as creating new potential neighborhoods, which are, should have a very high level of livability. And then there's a strategic move here, which is to shift the way people move. So that there are fewer people driving in, perhaps on their own in cars into parking structures in the center of the city or parking lots. But actually we have more people commuting by transit. And if they do drive in, they park once and then they can move around the city in lots of ways to go about their daily business. So there is background in terms of a series of studies which have led to this study, ranging from the Downtown Master Plan over a decade ago, the more recent Destination Medical Center Plan, the Comprehensive Plan, a series of transportation studies that evaluated different alternatives for how the growth and new transit capacity could be added to provide additional service. And that's led to this study, and then it will lead on to an additional study of more detailed architecture and engineering. And where we are in this immediate process is carrying out this round of engagement where we're really looking at high-level plans for station areas. And that then leads to a next stage of more detailed station area concepts, which we'll engage with you on again in June, and hopefully we'll see many of you in person, but we'll find other ways to see you otherwise. And then leading to an implementation and a funding application over the summer and in the beginning of the fall. Next. And there are a few things we want to focus on tonight. We are looking at the Broadway corridor segment, and in previous rounds of the webinar, we've looked at the West Gateway and the City Corridor on 2nd Street. Tonight, we're looking at Broadway. In each of these webinars, we've looked at a series of key factors. Connectivity, which is a word we use to summarize ideas about where stations are located, walking and bike routes, land uses, which is the range of activities that can actually happen, heights and densities, which at heart is the scale of development, and then public realm, which is about parks, riverfronts, particularly in this area, plazas, and the quality of streetscape. And we'll come back to these, but these are just some examples of the types of diagrams that we'll be talking about tonight, and the types of diagrams that have been created for each of the segments that we're examining, which look at how things are connected, the land uses, heights and densities. And you can see here, there are some variations. As Jarrett mentions, there are some scenarios here given the scale of potential change. So at this point, before we could go any further, we wanted to see if there were any immediate questions people had.
Yes, hello. This will be an opportunity to ask some general questions before we dive into the deeper material. If anyone would, let's take a second to see if anyone has a question. And it looks as though that we have one person who has raised their hand. Sean, can you please give us a second to unmute your mic and allow you to ask the question?
Hi, thanks guys. Curious as to when is there discussion about 4th Street to 2nd Street? Why are those two blocks not being talked about currently, or what are plans with that? And whether that comes up now or later, that's fine, but just curious about that section of Broadway as well. Thanks.
Essentially, that corridor is being looked at. The focus of tonight was really more of those land use scenarios and those station locations. Our furthest north station on Broadway will be most likely be on 4th, or maybe just a little further north. We're still working on the fine details of that, but most likely we won't see a lot of significant change in land use scenarios in that area north of 4th. Chris or Adele, do you have an opinion on this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Sean. I think we will talk about this in a little more detail when we get into the scenarios later, with the rationale around the stations. But I think just the headliner here is the focus south of 4th is because of the scale of potential change that is happening or will happen south of 4th, given the nature of the opportunity sites there. But I think the area between 2nd and 4th is going to continue to evolve, but it may be more of a renovation and reuse question in the future as opposed to a redevelopment question. But I think we'll come back to this as we go through. Okay, great. And so Adele's going to join me in this component as well. And this is really just some headline background on the rationale for rapid transit. The fundamental idea that if the city is to continue to grow, it needs additional transportation capacity, but it also needs to shift the nature of how people move away from driving in motor vehicles to more use of transit. So Adele, do you want to say anything here and then give some detail on the BRT itself?
Sure, yeah. So maybe kind of getting into some of the specifics, Rochester is slated to grow by about 40,000 residents in the next 20 years. So it's a lot of new people to accommodate in those intervening years, and a lot of new jobs as well. Olmsted County, we saw projections of about 38,000 employees added to the county. And much of that growth is going to happen downtown and in the DMC area. And in order for people to be able to come downtown without increasing congestion, without using up all of the valuable real estate downtown with parking, or expanding streets out and out and out and gobbling up land that way, the city and DMC are really investing. They're looking toward transit to carry more trips. They're looking toward biking and walking to increase their percentage of trips as well. And so city and DMC and their partners are all investing in those that infrastructure and those capabilities. So what is Rochester Rapid Transit? We're talking a lot tonight. Our focus is really on the potential for change around the rapid transit line. But before we get deep into that, I thought it's helpful to just understand what sort of transit facilities and service we're talking about. I like to say that it is high capacity and high quality transit service. By high capacity, I mean that the mode of transit can carry a lot of people. We're talking about service every 5 minutes during peak periods, which are roughly 6 to 9 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m. We're talking about service that runs from roughly 5 a.m. to 11 p.m. on weekdays and 8 a.m. to 11 p.m. on weekends. We're talking about service that outside of those peak periods runs every 10 minutes. So buses are coming very frequently. They are extended buses. We sometimes call them articulated buses. You may have seen them. They have the accordion in the middle. They can hold 100 to 120 people at a time. And for now, at least the city is considering electric buses as well. In terms of the service being high quality, it only stops at designated stations, and those stations all have a certain level of quality. They have shelter, light, heat. They have real-time information about when the next buses are coming, and they have a place to pay your fare off board, so there's no fumbling for change on the bus. They also have security features and level boarding, so that you can just roll or walk right onto the bus without stepping up or having to deploy a ramp, which takes a lot of time. And then finally, the termini would be transit villages that are higher density and places that are destinations in and of themselves.
Okay, so now we'll talk about Broadway Corridor itself, and just as a reminder, over the recent webinars, we talked about the West Gateway, the City Corridor, and now we're talking about Broadway. And information on all of these corridors is available on the website, and recordings of previous webinars addressing 2nd Street are available also. Okay, so next. So the South Broadway Corridor, we really see this as a new city district and gateway and a point of arrival to downtown. And one of the ways to think about this is that Rochester has had a very concentrated downtown historically, but this is becoming more of a central city, and it's reflecting what's happening in other cities across the country where historic downtowns change their nature. They become more diverse. They have people living, working, shopping, recreating, seeking entertainment, and a wider sense of lifestyle, urban lifestyle as well. And they expand along corridors and into what historically were previously industrial areas as well. And part of the context for the Broadway Corridor, we'll look specifically today around the area bounded by 4th to 9th and a half. But DMC and the DMC initiative is significant context and overlap here. And East Transit Village, which would be to the south, is also context for this as well. So next. And one of the things we wanted to talk about was what's the diversity and nature of development that could occur. So this is an area that has existing residential neighborhoods today. And those are historic neighborhoods and relatively low scale as well. Some of them actually have some density because the lots are smaller and closer together, but the scale is low. And so we're interested in how we could use a townhome scale to transition to neighborhoods and then transition back and forth between the opportunity areas and the existing neighborhoods. Next. And then there's an opportunity to think about transit-oriented development in a sense that's become quite well known across the country in terms of the scale of development associated with streetcars, BRT, other transit systems, these kind of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-story developments, which can be mixed use, residential, community facilities, shopping at the base. So that is the scale that we'll be looking at also. Next. And given the proximity to downtown and the concentration of transit services, particularly on 4th Street and Broadway in the future, there may be opportunities for taller buildings along the primary streets. So next. But underlying this, there are some questions about what happens at the ground plane as well. So great streets, we think all of the streets should be great streets. They need to work for all modes of transit, and they should work for people in all aspects of their daily life and how they move around. So next. And then there's the opportunities for larger open spaces, which could incorporate a range of activities and should be usable year round and all seasons. There should be places that are major destinations for surrounding neighborhoods and for the city as a whole. And then there's the opportunities for smaller public spaces as well. We think this is important, and I think particularly in the environment we're in right now, the value of having smaller open spaces close to home or your place of work is really coming to the fore. And there's a lot of discussion about the need for this kind of space as new development happens, and that's happening across the country now as well. And Rochester is a city that has larger regional open spaces, but maybe doesn't have as many of these smaller neighborhood spaces. So as we look at the Broadway corridor, we also look at connectivity as well. So what will be the most connected places in the future? So this is a way of looking at this area, which incorporates the rapid transit route, but existing buses, proposed bike routes, existing bike routes. So you can get a sense of what the connectivity framework will be in the future. And that gives us some clues about what the nature of activity, land uses, and development could be in the future. Next. And then we start to look at what we consider to be opportunity sites. And it's important to talk about what that means. Opportunity sites, and we are looking out over the next 20 years, opportunity sites could consider questions of vacant land, surface parking lots that may be underutilized now as a use, and which could be a higher value use for the future. And then also the potential that some existing activities may relocate or choose to be somewhere else, or there may be transition in uses over time because of changes in the market. We also think it's important to note that there is no kind of intention here to force anybody out that wants to stay where they are. And this is about creating development opportunities that integrate existing users where they want to stay, and supporting existing neighbors and neighborhoods and enhancing those where people wish to stay in place. So there is a collection of larger sites that do have opportunities for a range of different uses. One of the things we did want to say previously is that there's going to be a more detailed study of this area over the coming months, potentially beginning in the summer, and that would run over the summer and fall. So once this process is completed, there will be an additional neighborhood planning process to set standards and requirements for the future for any development, public spaces, treatments of the riverfront that would occur in this area. Next. So there are actually two scenarios we want to look at tonight, and as Jared mentioned, there are kind of some key differences. You'll notice in scenario one, we have a station at 4th Street, 6th, and 9th. And then in the second, we have a station at 4th, 8th, and 9th. And the difference is one scenario anticipates a connection across the river at 6th. There is discussion about whether that's a pedestrian, bicycle, or actually a street bridge that has all modes on it. And that could have quite a significant impact in terms of the shape of development in the area. There is also a difference in the sense of, do we just continue the existing neighborhood street grid and replicate that? Or do we anticipate that, given the scale of development, potential development here, and a 20-year time frame, individual properties may come along on their own? So thinking about some of the larger sites that and larger ownerships that define property boundaries in this area, do we need to think about that? So there are a couple of different factors that inform our thinking about two different scenarios. Next. And these are some of the questions and also some things that it would be useful to think about as we go through some of the detail here. So what do you think about the options for rapid transit station at either 6th or 8th around the Zumbro River Bridge? And that is kind of a discussion point of the different options there. Should the area between Broadway and 3rd Avenue provide new jobs? Should it be an employment and economic focus, or should it lean more towards being a residential neighborhood? And then open spaces, should they be focused along the Zumbro River, or is there an opportunity to create an east-west connection, which would link across the site and connect some of the existing neighborhoods to the east over to Broadway Avenue and to the transit service, and actually enhance connections to the river and to Soldiers Field as well. Next. Okay, so this is our first scenario. Next. And you can see here that we're really, in this one, the idea is that there is a station at 4th, 6th, and 9th. And Adele will talk us through the rationale for those station locations.
Thanks, Chris. So here we are recommending stations at 4th, 6th, and 9th Streets. And before I get into the specific criteria that made these our recommendations, I wanted to talk through a little bit about how we evaluated station locations and came with our recommendations. There were a few things that we looked at. One was, does the station serve a place where people want to go? And not just a few people, but a critical mass of people. So we're thinking about things like employment density, population density, development opportunities that will bring more people or more jobs or more destinations to a station area. In particular, we're thinking about transit dependent populations, households without vehicles or low income households. We also think a lot about whether it's easy to bike or walk to the station, easy to get to the station without a car, easy to take a bus to transfer at that station. So we're looking at things like the connections in all 4 directions from a station, especially on foot. We're thinking about not just are those connections there, but what's the quality of those connections? What is the streetscape like? What is the walking environment? Are there bicycle facilities on the streets or adjacent to those streets? Is there pedestrian scale lighting? Are there shade trees? All these kinds of qualitative things that make a walk or a bike easier to a station. And then finally, we also thought a lot about whether the station works well for transit operations. We are looking for a certain station spacing of roughly a 1/4 mile to a 1/2 mile in lower density locations. And that's to help keep the rapid in rapid transit, keep the bus from stopping too frequently, and then it slows way down. We're also looking at we are going to be using what's called transit signal priority on this route, which is a communication system between the bus and traffic signals. And that enables buses to trip the light, to hold the green longer for buses, or to ask for a green sooner. And so it tends to work better for that system if stations are located around an intersection. So those are some of the transit considerations that we looked at. So now, more specifically, 4th Street and what makes 4th Street a compelling station location. I think there are several things that are in 4th Street's favor. One is that it is a central corridor that connects the east and the west sides of town and on either side of Broadway. The connections are there and the destinations are there today. You know, there's big destinations nearby, like the Government Center, like One Discovery Square. Obviously, a lot of downtown is walkable from this station location, but it's also connected to those opportunity sites that Chris had pointed out earlier, those big swaths of yellow just on the east side of the river and south of 4th Street. So it is both a good location for now and a strong location for the future. The pedestrian environment is quite good, and there are existing bike routes in nearby and some planned routes also. I forgot to mention, and this was an oversight on my part, that if you attended the February open houses, we also had a questionnaire there, and we asked for folks' opinions or thoughts about where stations should be located. And that was another thing that we looked at when we were coming up with recommendations was, you know, is this in line with what people were saying as their priority for station locations? And 4th Street came up as one of the top station location recommendations from open house attendees. Next one. So 6th Street, this is a station location that is intuitive in that it provides access to the future UMR campus, and students are a great source of transit ridership, a good market for transit. And it of course provides access to the existing neighborhoods to the west. And really the future access piece is big here. So Chris mentioned before that bridge over the river, it really would make the 6th Street station much stronger from a future perspective, because then it's connected to those opportunity sites and that redevelopment to the north and south of 6th, what would be 6th Street, and then also forms that easy connection in and over to Slattery Park. Next one. So finally, 9th Street. This is a logical station location because it is the most direct connection today to Slattery Park. And obviously 9th Street is has a bike lane and is also, or is planned for a bike lane, you know, and is the most direct connection to Slattery Park. Of course, serves Soldiers Field Park as well.
Okay, so having seen those, the ideas for those station locations, this is a series of diagrams that talk about how we would potentially relate future development on opportunity sites to those station locations. So this shows the street connectivity framework, and as we talked about before, there was really strong connections on 4th Street, potentially would be a really strong connection on 6th, and then another connection, community connection on 9th as well. And this is an opportunity to kind of continue the street grid from the east. So you'd have continuous connections from neighborhoods from the east through this area and connecting to the river, but also connecting to Broadway and the transit assets on Broadway. And this sets up a series of walkable development blocks, much like are in place in the neighborhoods today. So next. And then this is the open space bike and trail connectivity system that could be attached to that. So again, strong emphasis on the BRT route, but also connecting bike routes through to the BRT stations at 4th, 6th, and 9th, and recognizing the transit connections on 4th as well. But the trails also extend along the river and through the local park system as well. So this is actually kind of an idea where you could have a trail-to-trail connection through neighborhoods, but also enhanced access from neighborhoods to the park and open space system in the area. And the riverfront really is kind of a jewel here. You know, it's a really important opportunity with the riverfront, and this is something that other cities have really embraced, and Rochester has embraced this river as well. This is an opportunity to continue that further to the south. There are lots of different ways of doing this, from very naturalized approaches through to more ornamental or engineered approaches. Each of them can be spectacular in their own way and create destination and an asset that existing residents, future residents, and future workers can use. Next. So looking at land uses in this scenario, one of the key things to pay attention to is that we are looking at an employment focus to the north. So the government center is to the north. There's significant employment in the area. already in terms of office employment, but also other employment in terms of hotel, retail, smaller offices, services. So we thought there was an opportunity to explore employment focus at the north to continue that economic focus of an expanding central city. And then to the south would be a more residential focus, but then including mixed uses. So we mean retail, community services on 9th and on Broadway as well. These are close to the transit station at 9th, but also highly accessible to existing residents in surrounding neighborhoods. And then this is an approach, this is a pattern that starts to talk about what the nature of heights and densities might be. And one of the key things to notice here is that on 3rd, we have lower density. So we're looking at a 2- and 3-story development along 3rd, in some ways reflecting what the scale of the surrounding neighborhood is. And then we step up to 3 and 4 stories within the site and along 9th. And then as we move towards Broadway and up towards 4th, we're really stepping up. And it could be a mix of 5 and 8 stories. And in some locations where it's appropriate, it could be 9 to 14 stories. And that reflects the intensity of transit from bus and future rapid transit and accessibility by cars and bikes and pedestrian links. But it also reflects the scale of Broadway. Broadway is a significant street. It has a wide right-of-way, it has multiple lanes. It's a broad street. It's called Broadway because it's a broad street. And so we think the scale of development could respond to that scale of street as well. So I think we can open it up. We will go into the second scenario and talk about that in more detail in a moment, but we thought it'd be interesting to open it up for questions now.
Thank you, Chris. We currently don't have anyone with their hand raised, but we received several questions in the last 10 to 15 minutes. One of them I want to directly point to Adele and get Adele prepared to talk a little bit about what these stations might actually look like and what information about the future what future information was taken into consideration when planning these stations. But before I hand it off to Adele, I want to say there's a question here about timeline. We're hoping to go ahead and submit the transit piece of this element to the federal government here later this year, September. And with that, if we're successful in funding, we're probably not looking at construction until 2023, and the system being open and operating for people to ride until 2025. Adele, can you answer some of those station questions?
Sure. So the stations are meant to be focal points for this transit line, and they are meant to be welcoming and make it clear what their function is. They are also meant to offer shelter from the elements, and I think there is a lot of discussion and opportunity for public input yet to come about the design of the station itself. There are great opportunities to incorporate public art. There's been some discussion about the level of enclosure and possibly climate controlling some of the stations. In particular, at the St. Mary's Hospital location, transit center is planned. So that would be a fully enclosed place to wait for the bus, and one that would be connected via an underground tunnel into the hospital itself. And then, so the stations are generally, if you've ever visited the Twin Cities or ridden a light rail elsewhere, so obviously they are outdoor. They are going to be on the side of the street, and they will have the features that I discussed last time. I think maybe one other thing to maybe spend a little more time on is the concept of level boarding, which, so right now, you know, you might have a 4 to 6 inch curb where the street steps up to the sidewalk, and essentially the station, the sidewalk would be gently ramped up to a station location so that the curb can be a bit higher and it comes up to meet the bus. And this is a really important feature because it allows for those buses to pull in and kind of dock, and people to use the use all entrances of the bus to roll right on or walk right on. If you're in a mobility device or you're using a cart or a stroller, you know the value of that. And that's often something that we hear as that people really value about rail transit, and we are able to replicate that with a bus here in this corridor. Is there anything else, Jarrett, that you were hoping I would talk about?
A question came on in about what is the typical footprint size of the station?
Sure. So the buses themselves are about 60 feet long, and so usually the platform is about 80 feet long. I'm trying to think if there's a good analogy of something else that's 80 feet long. But if you can picture an accordion bus, it's, you know, it's one of those with a little bit of breathing room on either end.
Thank you, Del. The next question I'm going to point towards Chris. Chris, we have a couple of questions about the difference between why some areas were identified as opportunity sites and what areas weren't. Specifically, the question was about some residential placed along 3rd Street, why that wasn't recognized as an opportunity site.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things here. One is being incredibly sensitive to existing neighborhoods and residents, and kind of understanding that there's a very strong sense of identity and care for existing neighborhoods, and people really wanting to make sure that there's very careful attention paid to any impacts on those neighborhoods. I think here at this scale, we're looking at the larger opportunities. So over time, there may be infill in terms of is there a vacant lot on 3rd between 2 existing homes? Then of course over time that should be improved. But at this scale, this is really a more macro scale where we're looking at larger opportunities, more obvious opportunities where you have surface parking lots or vacant sites or industrial uses that may be relatively low density and aging facilities, and maybe looking at relocating over time. So I think that's the idea. And I think, again, just to emphasize that there'll be a more detailed study beginning after this study is completed, looking at this area in more detail, and also an area of influence, which is kind of, you know, the half mile around these opportunity areas. And I think that's where it'll become more kind of granular in the sense of being able to look at individual lots.
Thank you, Chris. In the interest, we have several more questions that have been submitted, but in interest in people's time and trying to keep us to an hour, I think we should move forward. And Chris, could you please continue? And hopefully we might be able to answer a few of these at the end.
Yeah, and we'll move quickly through this so we can come back to a question. So yeah, in scenario 2, this is a different approach where there is stations focused at 4th, around the bridge at 8th, and then south of 9th. And the key difference is that there isn't a bridge, an east-west bridge over the river at 6th.
So looking at the 8th Street station location, this location was chosen because it does offer connections to neighborhoods and opportunity sites on both sides of the river, even though there isn't an east-west bridge in this location. But it is very much a future-looking station in that a new connection across the eastern, between Broadway and 3rd on 8th Street would need to be made. And that would allow for access to those opportunity sites and a better connection to Slattery Park from this from this station location. It does serve the UMR Future Campus, and of course connects to Soldiers Field Park and the trail system along the river and in the park.
You can see the effect here of 6th Street not coming through, and also the effect of thinking about larger property ownerships and those boundary lines as defining characteristics for a street grid. So the idea here is that with stations at 4th, 8th, and 9th, that we would align the street framework, an east-west street framework, perhaps more organized around some of the larger site opportunities. So the street grid wouldn't connect exactly in the way the east-west streets do through neighborhoods right now, but 6th would extend into the site, 7th would extend, and 9th would still be an important connector through the site. So next. And you can see here, this is, our connectivity and open space framework is slightly different as a result. And so you can still see there are strong connections on 4th and 9th. And then we look to an idea that there could be a new 8th Street connecting through the site, and that would be a greenway as well. We see that as a series of open spaces, but also a richly landscaped street for walking, for cycling, vehicles as well, but a really strong emphasis on other ways of moving. And that these series of open spaces would be a destination and resource for existing residents as well as new residents. And some examples here of what we mean by this. And again, there are lots of different examples from kind of the large scale of the Atlanta Beltline, and then some more neighborhood scale and smaller scale connections in Dallas and in Boston as well. But these are kind of reference ideas for the nature of the space and the connection that could be created along 8th Street. And then with the land use scenario here, we've done something slightly different. This is much more of a residential emphasis, so less emphasis on employment at the north. So a series of residential blocks and then some focused areas that have mixed use activity. And that mixed use could include employment, but it's likely to be retail. It could be hotel, could be community services as well. So focusing that on 4th Street, again, where there is a lot of transit connection already, it's a very accessible place and is close to downtown as a destination. Looking at 8th as well, so having a mixed-use focus around the station, but also addressing the open space, and maybe those things could work together to create a really high-quality and exciting urban place. And then looking at, again, a focus for mixed use on Broadway and 9th. Close to the station, this could include workspace. It could have a community services focus as well, highly accessible for people on the BRT, on the rapid transit route and coming into the city by bus, but also highly accessible to residents of surrounding neighborhoods. And the heights and density approach, again, is the similar principle, but laid out slightly differently with lower densities, so 2 to 3 stories on 3rd Avenue, closer to existing neighborhoods, and then stepping up through the site, and then the tallest buildings being on 4th, and then being at 9th and Broadway. In this case, those heights are around 5 to 8 stories. So compared with the other alternative, the other scenario, which had some taller buildings really focused around 9th and around 4th, this keeps to a more typical transit-oriented development scale in terms of the types of developments that we've seen in other areas associated with streetcar and bus rapid transit and those kinds of systems.
Okay, thank you, Chris. This is once again an opportunity for if you have a question you'd like to ask us, we can please raise your hand and we can unmute your mic and you can allow us to ask the question. You can ask the question. We have a few that were submitted that we'd like to try to go ahead and answer. One of the first ones that I think is really easy to knock off, will the buses carry bikes, Adele?
Yes, so the exact design of the bus hasn't yet been selected, but there are lots of BRT, bus rapid transit buses that do carry bikes, whether on their front. You may have seen bike racks on the fronts of buses before, but also we've seen models where there are bike racks inside the bus. So yes, exactly how remains to be determined.
Thank you, Adele. One of the questions that was submitted was relating to the station locations, particularly in relation to the concept of low income. Adele, was that included?
Yes, we looked at what we call transit dependent populations. So we looked at low income households as well as households without a vehicle in the station areas. It was one of our considerations. I would say that, you know, transit is absolutely a service for everyone, but we know that for households that are low income and or don't own a car today, that many of them are already transit riders. And so the idea of providing existing transit riders with a better, higher quality service is definitely one I think that this project seeks to achieve.
Thank you, Adele. We have Kelly. Kelly's raised her hand to ask a question.
Hi, I'm just wondering on scenario 1, I was looking at your kind of the density plan there, where it was 9 to 14 stories.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure on the length. Is this following our current new TOD zoning guidelines? Because I'm not sure 14 stories would fit with what we currently pass. So I don't want a big picture out there that's inaccurate.
Yeah, so one of the scope elements of this study is to identify if any adjustments to existing zoning and the regulatory framework would be required. So we are testing ideas here, some of which may require modifications to zoning in the future. But we thought in the the interest of being kind of expansive and thinking about all of the possibilities, that we would try some ideas that were outside of that existing envelope. And so some of them are within and some of them are out, and it's an opportunity to kind of think about those and think about whether future modifications to any of the existing zoning, even if recently adopted, if any future adjustments would be required.
Thank you, Chris, for answering that question. We received a question related to the 8th Street station location and how it's split on either side of the bridge. And essentially the question is, has there been any consideration of something like a pedestrian scramble level below the bridge deck that would allow people to choose which direction and which side of the river they would want to travel and stay away from the traffic and all dangers? I would say right now, I can speak to from the city standpoint and say, no, we haven't explored that type of concept, but we definitely can if 8th Street is one of those ideas that it's really supported by you, the public. Once again, I'll make this point that these stations that we're proposing here today are just put out there for the public, for you to respond to, and for you to try to critique and give us a response. If you don't like one of the locations, I definitely say go ahead and submit a new location if you don't like one of those locations. Chris, have you seen something like this before that's been asked in this question?
You know, it's an interesting idea, and I think it's a question of what the required navigability of the river is. Is there any boat traffic that would still need to travel, and what are the clearances? But it's an interesting idea to put a pedestrian connection of the river itself, so that people could make that crossing without having to cross traffic on Broadway. And of course, any crossing there would require a pedestrian signal and those kind of controls. And right now, to make that connection, of course, you would have to go down one side, under the bridge, up the other side, and then continue on the sidewalk once you get there. But it's an interesting idea. I think that's the kind of creativity that I think would be really welcome and could give some identity to thinking about the future of the river.
Chris, I agree. I think that is an interesting idea. And to jump off of your creativity, I wanted to answer a question here that was asked about have we considered people with disabilities trying to get to these stations. I would say we've, and Adele would probably agree with me, that we have looked at that slightly. But right now, that is one of the things that we are interested in you, the public, providing input on, is and as is the purpose of this study, is trying to connect the rapid transit system to the neighborhoods that are next to it. And so if sidewalks need to be improved, if head ramps need to be improved, please go ahead, submit an email at rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov or leave me a voicemail at 507-328-2025. Once again, that's 507-328-2025. Let's see here. Maybe another question here. Access, Adele, and access to the Skyway. Was that considered? And particularly the person that was asking a question about not only access and the station and location and access to the Skyway, but particularly about some of the Skyway and subway issues that we might have for hours that they're open and closed.
Yeah, so Skyway and subway connections were considered in placing the downtown station. I don't think we went so far as to consider the hours of that particular entrance, and that's a really good point. And I do think that it's interesting to kind of think about the future of the Skyway and subway system as well. I know we've talked a little bit about that with a 4th Street station, that perhaps there are eventual connections, one to 1 Discovery Square and 2 Discovery Square when they come online. And so a relatively quick access into the subway and Skyway system from there as well. But I believe those are the only 2 stations that are proximate to an entrance. We had another station proposed at 6th Avenue, but I think that one's still a couple of blocks away from the nearest building entrance, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think you're correct in that, Adele. Really, someone submitted a comment, not so much a question here, and support for the 6th Street station and then the 6th Street bridge. If you feel strongly, once again, this is your time to communicate your feedback to us. If you feel strongly that 6th Street station is a good station and it would even be stronger supported by a bridge at that location, please reach out to us. Once again, I'll hit up our feedback channels, and that's kind of where we'll conclude the night. Once again, you can reach us at rapidtransit@rochestermm.gov, or you can leave us a voicemail at 507-328-2025. That all being said, I want to thank you all for attending. I want to remind you that the third way that you could provide input to us, besides the email and the phone number, is to also visit our interactive webpage. In there, Chris showed you several questions that we had about Broadway. In there, you can go to the specific area or corridor that you're interested in, if you're interested in 2nd Street west of 52 or even just Broadway, and then scroll to the bottom and answer those questions that are at the bottom. If you need help accessing that website, please visit our project webpage. Once again, that's probably the best way to access that interactive page and those survey links. And additionally, on the webpage, you'll be able to view this webinar eventually, and our 2 previous ones, see slides from tonight and other presentations. Once again, the interactive webpage, and definitely check out all the questions that were asked as part of tonight's webinar will be answered and then posted online. Thank you all once again for your attendance tonight, and thank you for the flexibility through this pandemic as we try to find ways to reach out to you, the public, and get your input. Once again, if you have any concerns about station locations, please provide that feedback. That is what we're interested in through this process. Those feedback feedback lines will be open for will be open definitely for the rest of the month of April. Hopefully we might even extend it a little bit longer, but definitely please come ahead and submit your feedback through the month of April. I can see Chris is still on the line. Chris, did you want to say anything before we go?
Just thank you everybody for your patience through this process and your flexibility in engaging in the process in this way. We hope it's been helpful, and any questions or comments, we're happy to respond to them. So thank you for your attention tonight.
Thank you, Chris, and once again, I'll thank Adele from SRF as well as presenting tonight. And once again, I just want to help. Please take the time and answer those survey questions when we're done. Thank you. Have a good night, and enjoy our spring outside.